It is nearly 5:50 in the evening, and that is technically sunset as of today, for this region anyway. It is definitely getting colder. All the coolness of this little woodland environment has kind of faded. Maybe I'll have to pick a new spot to video. We'll see. One thing I was thinking about over the last few days is the way people interact with language. If we take, for example, the term arrested development, that is a term used to represent people's struggle to grow up and mature, largely due to traumatic life experiences or other things that they're just having trouble coming to terms with. If we look at the word development in this context, we see that in this context, but also in a larger scope, people refer to development as a word used to define a sense of progress, meaning you're aiming towards an end goal. An end goal that is preferably better than where you currently are. Arrested development, for example, would only make sense as a term if development was meant in a progressive march towards something better, or something more full, something more mature. As with mostly everything, however, there are multiple ways of looking at the same thing. The word development does not necessarily mean progression. It can mean something broader. It can just refer to change. If you take this view that development is just change, then you can make the case that you can develop into something better or something worse. Most people don't think of the word develop in this way. It's interesting to me how people so often take only one side of a word or a position and essentially run with that, in large part because that makes them feel better. A situation can, of course, change for the better, but it can also develop into something worse. It can change into something that was unforeseen quite quickly, and then change the course of your life. I think if people had a better grasp on the way language and definitions worked, there'd be less conflict in societies. But to reach a point where you can fully appreciate the meaning of words, that requires years of education and thought. And that is just something some people are unwilling or unable to go through. I'm not sure if education is the answer to all the problems of society. However, I do think it would at least limit some of the nonsensical arguments some people make to justify their otherwise unjustifiable positions. Another thing that's interesting to think about is the way the internet has changed the economy, or at least the prospect that a random normal person could express themselves and maybe make money. In the past, it was relatively unthinkable that a normal person could express their ideas to a larger audience. However, that school of thought is not applicable today. Anyone with time and with something interesting to say can reach hundreds of thousands or millions of people with their idea. It just has to be interesting enough for people to care about. So many people have negative things to say about celebrities, but at the end of the day, The only difference between a normal person and a celebrity figured out a way to get millions of people to care about what they're doing. It is totally fine to be a normal person and live a private life. But then, that person should not pass negative judgment on celebrities. The same thing can be said for things like the adult film industry. People can have their ideas about whether expressing yourself in that way is the best thing to do. That is totally fine. However, those people should also understand that some people are in such a position that they have no problem with expressing themselves in such a physical way. At the end of the day, everyone has a series of choices to make. And people should not pass judgment on one another as long as those actions serve a benefit to society. For example, I believe I can pass judgment on Republican politics because I believe in its current form, Republican politics doesn't serve to benefit society. In my view, it has successfully manipulated people into believing that their form of ideology benefits society. But that is different from having an actual benefit on society. At least the sky is not totally gray like it was the other day. There's a hint of a shade of blue, almost purple, mixed with some shade of pale yellow. When people have debates and they misuse words, in a sense, limiting what a word means, that's how misunderstanding breeds. That's what feeds misunderstanding. When you watch debate shows on YouTube and you see things like, we have absolutely no evidence and will never have any evidence as to how life was first formed on this planet. You see how such a claim could cause frustration and hardship among a great segment of the scientific population. If you're wanting to make the claim that we have insufficient evidence as to how life first formed on this planet, that would be a matter of debate, a matter of how you define the word insufficient. But then, to go a step further and to claim things like, we will never know how life first formed on this planet. That is a claim that will not stand the test of time. I think people need to be more careful in how they articulate positions. If people took more care into actually understanding the meaning of language, I think society would be in a much better position. And that in itself is not a radical thing that would require so much effort to change. It's not like you have to develop all of nuclear fusion to solve that problem. It would just require a concerted effort on the part of the public to actually take the time to learn how to appreciate language. Philosophers spend a lot of time thinking about life, thinking about existence, and knowledge. But the first step to expressing any of that is to have an appreciation for the definition of words and to have an appreciation for language as a whole. Without that, all the logic and reasoning that follows can't happen. And whatever logic and reason does follow from incomplete uses of language is inherently flawed. It is my belief that most people are operating on flood arguments in large part because they don't understand the use of language or the meaning of words. And the people that do understand the power of language and words will oftentimes manipulate people that do not understand by selectively choosing how they represent what a word means. Inaccurately representing what a word means and doing so purposefully is one of the greatest tools manipulators use. An intelligent person who wants to use language only for their benefit can be a very dangerous person. There's a reason things like fraud and abusive relationships exist. And that's in part because it's easy for smart people to use language for manipulative purposes and essentially create a world for themselves that is not whole. A world which is rich in misunderstanding and lies. Sometimes the legal system catches up with these people, these manipulators of language and people, and other times it does not. I believe that if you truly want to be protected from the manipulative behaviors of others, the best thing you can do is to become educated. Education not only shows you the way the world works, but in doing so, it acts as a protective shield against people who seek to harm you. See, that's the cool thing about just going off stream of consciousness and not having a script. I didn't know exactly how a talk on language would go or how expansive I could make it. But as the talk flowed on, it reached areas I didn't think it would reach. And as a result, that led to a more comprehensive discussion on the power of language and education. That's what I was saying yesterday about philosophy in general, but this applies to all ideas really. If you can come up with an initial idea, then other things will naturally flow from your expression of that initial idea. It goes back to what I have been saying, how the universe is most likely just a probability generator. It can generate an infinite number of possibilities. In a way, when you just let your mind roam from one idea to the next, with some connection in between, you are in the process of possibility generation. So, in a sense, you are one with the universe. I'm glad I finished that thought before it got too dark. It's not quite winter yet. It's still fall. So, the time between sunset and actual darkness is quite different. As you approach winter, the time between sunset and actual darkness shortens. But I think that is going to be the end of the video. Because the light is fading. And I am out of ideas for the day. So I will leave you with a view of the darkening sky